Welcome in, everybody, to the GC Live post-game show. The Gamecocks falling in the regular season finale today to Clemson, 16-7. That's right, 16-7. Despite the Gamecocks not allowing a defensive touchdown, the offense was not able to figure it out. That Clemson front seven giving them fits all game, and I certainly think that is where we have to start tonight. Joining me, as he's been joining me the entire season, is former Gamecock offensive lineman Garrett Anderson. And Garrett, I talk about that offensive line going up against Clemson's front. We knew that this was probably going to be one of the better fronts that they were going to see all year. Could put it in there with Texas A&M and Tennessee. Do you feel like when we look at the offense as a whole, we start to break things down as to why this didn't work? Does it feel like you have to start right there? The inability to run the football and trying to find ways to just get some type of rhythm?
You know, there's a lot of frustration with what Loggins is doing on the offense, but, you got to stop and think, if you can't run the ball at all, inside zone, outside zone, any kind of pin pull, stretch type stuff, you've got nothing there. If you remove the entire half of your offense, what are you really left with? And there are a couple of times where we gave enough protection, but, if you got to keep in 7 guys to protect, that leaves you with 3 guys out there running routes versus, there are a lot of times that they brought 5 people and got pressure within 3 seconds. It's just not enough. It starts with the O-line, but, to say that's something new, it's a broken record at this point. But at the end of the day, what can you expect from Rattler in those kind of situations?
And naturally, some people are going to ask, like, okay, wait a minute. They've had to go through this issue the entire season. We saw with South Carolina over the last couple of weeks, you're able to play the same starting offensive line. Again, I understand from a fan standpoint, they want to be able to point at something to be able to say, why was it? Why was that the case? I know that you don't necessarily know all the, the blocking assignment calls, but just from your experience and watching tonight and watching over the last couple of weeks, especially these last 2 weeks, why don't you think South Carolina wasn't able to get the offense generating these last 2 weeks like the way they were earlier in the year?
I think a lot of, Mario getting beat up a little bit too is kind of hurting us too. But I think there's a lot of times where, we haven't had the greatest run game all year, but we've at least had a semblance of a run game. There were numerous times where we didn't block a soul up front. And I don't think Clemson's front's that much better than, I don't say Kentucky, but, let's talk about Florida and other teams like that they have the culture to bring in good players regardless of their record. It's a complete joke when we were out there. I don't really know what else to say other than, it is one thing, but it's not as if it was the only issue. There's a lot of things we had going on today that, started with the O-line, but it was kind of a team effort there.
Intern Joe, just your thoughts from watching it from afar tonight.
Yeah, my initial thoughts, obviously, like Mike said, I'm back home, but so I caught all of it on TV. My initial thoughts are, that's a really tough game to lose, especially on home turf. You've got Williams-Brice Stadium as packed to the brims as you did. The atmosphere seemed great as always, but that's a really tough game to lose. Ultimately, you couldn't get the run game going. You're already short at running back, and then Mario Anderson takes a really hard hit early in the game, is shaken up, doesn't really play the same after that, and then you're down to DJ Braswell and DeCarrion Joyner's banged up. South Carolina's banged up across the board. Mike and Garrett talked about the offensive line already. It seemed porous tonight, but give credit to Clemson's defense. Give credit where credit is due. That front seven is one of the best that South Carolina, has played all year. I would rank them up there with Georgia, Tennessee. Scary front seven. They got the job done for Clemson tonight. And I think, that was the difference, right? Their front seven. I wasn't as impressed with their DBs and their defensive backfield, but their front seven is really what caused all of the issues for the South Carolina offense tonight, and which was the reason why South Carolina couldn't pull it off.
I do want to get into the defense in a little bit, but it's really difficult to even move to them right now and give them praise, which they certainly deserve. We've talked about this over the last 3 weeks. They started to play some really good football these last 3 weeks of the season. There'll be plenty of time to go back and evaluate the season as a whole, not just defensively, but in all 3 phases and just as a program in general. We will certainly do that. But having said that, Garrett, it's difficult not to continue to look at the offense. And as you mentioned, it's not just the offensive line. And I know that to some people, it's so easy just to say, well, no, it's that. No, sometimes it is pre-snap assignments, right? Quarterback may have misidentified something. We saw that a couple times, it felt like, where guys came off freely, and that could have been on Rattler. There was times, too, right, where the running back may have missed the blocking assignment. And when you have Mario Anderson out there and behind him, and I know DK battled through and tried to play tonight, God bless that young man. I told you right after the game, alone, DK's walking around the stadium just thanking fans. And I can only imagine what the emotions are going through his head after 6 years. But I say all that because the offense as a whole, this is something that we saw, especially last week. And for whatever reason, obviously the answer that you look at first is, well, it's a good Clemson front, but they weren't able to adjust. Xavier Legette, he took a shot early on to the knee. I thought that played an impact in him not being able to create the separation that we've seen him do. I think, Garrett, to me, and I don't know about you, to me, I was just holding on to the hope. I was hoping that, hey, maybe this is going to be a situation where South Carolina hits the home run play like we've seen over and over and over. I just don't know what else to really say about the offense tonight.
Well, and I mean, like Matt said in the comments, I mean, that's the one thing about it was that Clemson gave us so many opportunities to win that game, and we just never took advantage of it. You know, our defense did play really good, and we will talk about it, but the amount of times we gave, you know, our defense gave us the ball back and we gave them a 3-and-out. I mean, there's just things like that it's not going to work. Yeah, you know, bear in mind too, you know, we're talking a little bit, a couple different players that are banged up. The O-line is actually pretty injured. You know, and this is another thing too, and this is just sort of a question that I think a lot of people will talk about going forward, because this is the last game of the season. All we got to look forward to with spring ball at this point is what do you do with a lot of the guys on the coaching staff? You know, let's talk about all the different injuries you had on the offensive line. Let's talk about the amount of people. I mean, you got Gargiulo, who is not a center. He is a guard. He's a guard that's a placeholder tackle who we had playing centered, who's been banged up all year, multiple injuries here and there that, I mean, a lot of guys don't even really know about. He's just playing through, you know.
Yeah, and we'll get into it. And we talked about this because I didn't want to seem like I was bringing up excuses with certain players. But one thing that I learned prior to today's game, Gargiulo has been dealing with a busted up hand. And as some of you may have noticed throughout the course of the season, there's been times where some of those snaps have come out low. And some of that has to do with the fact that he has to grip the ball a little bit differently. He's having to choke up on the football. And that's why, because his hand is so busted up. But going back to your point, number one, he's having to play out of position simply because the offensive line has been so banged up, number one. Number two, it also goes to show that he's their best option at center. And on top of that, number three is just simply the fact that because of all the injuries, if Gargiulo were to go out, right, like, hey, I'm hurt, you know, I got to step out, who would you have thrown in there? So that's the problem. So, look, I get it. It's real easy to look at certain players, Gargiulo one in particular, and be like, man, this guy, no. This guy was doing a lot. And there's also, too, as the offensive lineman, there's things that you don't see that he's having to cover up for some of the other guys on the O-line because of it. Again, I don't bring that up to make excuses for anyone. We're just talking about that. But it goes to show that there were multiple issues with this team. Injuries definitely piled up on the O-line. And unfortunately for USC, even though they were able to get healthy to a degree at this point of the season, you're all going to be banged up.
I mean, bearing in mind that you talk about how frustrating the O-line is, but we got a guy who's a transfer from Yale who's been playing with multiple injuries and playing a position that he's not comfortable with, and that's still the best guy at the position. You got to understand, whoever is behind him or whatever the next option is, clearly so much farther behind that person. Now, granted, we got a lot of guys who need to have a year in the weight room, a year in conditioning, and a year just learning how to play offensive line in the SEC. And I'm hoping that our spring looks way different than, you know, this last game here. But at the end of the day, I'm going to put it on talent. Yeah. I do like Lonnie and Adkins. I think they're both really good at what they do. Now, like we've talked about all year, at the end of the day, there's a lot of good coaches who get fired and a lot of bad coaches who keep their job. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to do the job. And if the job's not getting done, you got to make moves.
I'll bring this one up. We've talked about it before. And again, we'll talk more about this on Tuesday night show as we, you know, kind of focus on tonight's game. But we've talked about this before. I don't think it's on Luke Day. I mean, we can get into that more in the offseason, but when you look at the injuries, specifically on the offensive line, I mean, you can look at across the board. It's not like these injuries are the same exact injuries, right? We've talked about it before. There's been schools. I mean, I've been part of one, but there's been schools out there. Shoulder injuries happen over and over, and you can point back and be like, hey, why are we having so many issues with shoulders? South Carolina's offensive line, and for the injuries for the most part this season, it wasn't just one injury, right? It wasn't just this was the same thing. Some of them were freak injuries. Now, we can really dissect it at some point and say, are they overtraining at points? And, you know, again, we can get into that in the offseason. But big picture, I would say no to that. I don't know if you necessarily agree.
So this is the one thing that I kind of lean on. This is kind of my viewpoint. I've coached at the college level, and I kind of understand just how the business works. At the end of the day, and this is what I'm meaning with Lonnie. I think Lonnie knows what he's talking about. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he just has a lot of banged up, less talented players. If we don't like the way the O-line's playing and you have to make a move, you make a move. It's the same thing with Luke Day. I think Luke Day knows what he's doing. I think he's a very good coach. I think he's good for the program. But if we keep on having all these soft tissue injuries, it's kind of on the head coach to make moves. It's not something fun. And this is kind of where I kind of go back with Clayton White. If you were to ask me middle of the season, what do? You got to make a move. You got to bring somebody else in. But then if you look at the progression towards the end, and guys, granted, this isn't like a Satterfield thing where you had the last game in the bowl game and things look drastically different. Sorry, Tennessee too. We also understand, this is just kind of, I think we all have come to the conclusion on this, was that clearly someone else was making those calls because the difference was so night and day. This has been a progression of, you've got younger linebackers, you've got younger players figuring out the offense, knowing where they need to be. I mean, golly, watch how many times today you had guys who are freshmen and sophomores learning throughout the season where they need to be, when they need to be there. That's coaching. And so what do you do with someone and I don't know the answer. This is more of a, question for the future. What do you do with those kind of coaches that, if your job is getting it done right, great. If it's not, you have to make a move.
Yeah, and again, we're going to have a lot of talk about this offseason because, unfortunately, South Carolina, they're not going bowling. Now, there's a possibility. I know people are talking about 5-7. We're not even going to entertain that thought. We're not even going to entertain that thought right now, okay? If it happens, great, we'll talk about it in a couple days. But right now, bottom line is 5-7, end of the regular season. Looks like the season's done. And the Gamecocks will be heading into year 4 of the Shane Beamer era next season. Before we start to, again, we can hit on certain things now because the season's done. I really don't want to make this into a end of the season review show because we'll have plenty of time to do that throughout the offseason. But defensively, these last 3 games, and I know some people are going to look at like we're talking like, oh, the glass is half full. Bottom line is they lost tonight. Okay, they lost. Having said that, the reason why you were even in this freaking game, the only reason why you were here in the fourth quarter with an opportunity to come back and win this game, despite the fact that your offense only had 1 freaking touchdown, is the fact that your defense didn't allow 1 touchdown tonight. They had the defensive touchdown early on, second play of the game. Clemson scored, and then they only allowed 3 other field goals. So I bring that up, Garrett, because last 3 weeks of the season, certainly forcing turnovers was a big emphasis for this defense, and they were able to do a lot of it. Would have liked to have seen another one tonight, but Nick Emanwori, for a second straight week, forces an interception in the end zone. Fortunately, the Gamecocks weren't able to do anything with that offensively. But having said that, what did you just notice from this defense? I know you were talking about the linebackers, but just the defense as a whole out of these last 3 weeks, especially today.
Well, we were just talking about, the 3 plays in my mind that change this game drastically are the second offensive play where we threw the ball behind the line, which is 7 points. You remove that. You have the intentional grounding call, which I still think was not right. You sneak on in here? Yeah, buddy.
Well, we got another person that hopped on in. Here. Michael Skarnecki is joining us. We're going to push this thing on back. We'll get to Mike in a second as Garrett wraps up his thoughts on the defense.
You had the intentional grounding issue, which you remove that bad call. That's 3 points. And the other thing, there's a call that was bad in this drive, and I'm blanking on it. But then whenever we missed that interception, if we catch that, that's the other 3 points. If you remove those 3 plays, we're winning that game 7-3. Now, the offense has got to do better than 7 freaking points, but that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Mike, I'm sure you're going to repeat a lot of the same things that we just talked about with the offense, but just your overall thoughts tonight. I mean, you've unfortunately have probably been part of games like this where the defense does their job, and as an offense, you're just not able to get enough offense generated. You're not able to get those home run plays. You're not able to get the run game or the quick game going because you're going up against a really good front, and that throws off the rhythm completely. I mean, just your overall thoughts of what you saw tonight.
Yeah, obviously the defense played well overall. I mean, they shut down their run game. They made Caden force a lot of throws. I don't want to say he made a lot of mistakes, but they forced him in an interception. He couldn't get into his rhythm that he was hoping for. And they gave our offense a lot of opportunities this game. And what really frustrated me, I think, is that our run game was completely flat tonight. And we kept trying to hammer it, especially on down and distances that we probably should have been doing some type of variation, whether it was doing a flat route, which has been successful these past several weeks with Simon, or doing some type of screen, trying to just get a variation in there, instead of just trying to do these outside zones or inside zones that just flat out weren't working. And they were putting us into second and longs, third and longs, and it was putting a lot of pressure on Spencer, especially considering how much pressure the defense Clemson was getting on him. And so he wasn't having time to just sit back there while we did have receivers getting open downfield. Xavier was open, I think, most of the night. And again, I think you guys probably have already talked on this, but the first drive, that just set the standard and set the tone for the rest of the game, I think, and especially for offense. And, I thought we were going to bounce back from that. And I don't think we really fully recovered from that drive the entire rest of the game. But, from overall, I think it was a disappointing performance from our offense. And I don't think it was completely just our players' fault. I think the game plan fell flat too.
Yep. You mentioned the game plan. We look at what this offense did throughout the course of the season, and certainly there were times where it wasn't great, but we started, especially at home, they were very explosive. You went up against, two good fronts these last 2 weeks. Okay, let's just call it for what it is. Kentucky, not the 86 Bears, but they had some good guys up front.
Yeah.
Clemson, certainly, some talented guys up front. What was it you think that just changed for this team over the last couple weeks? I mean, I know it's the $1 million question. If you had the answer, I mean, shoot, you'd be the OC.
Yeah. I think obviously they've been trying to find a variation in this run game, and it just has not been effective. And I think with the offseason coming, that's one thing we're going to have to focus on is how we can become effective with this run game, because you see what it does to the pass game and how much pressure it puts on, especially even if you have an elite QB. We're also going to have to find some depth at receiver. I think we saw it today with just separation, making contested catches throughout this game. There were some plays I think that could have been huge for us if we would have made those contested catches or made some more separation for Spencer. But, I think it's hard to call plays when you don't have all the assets you need, both depth of offensive line and continuity with that, and then a lack of depth in the run game where we don't have a lot of variation because we can't get a rhythm going there. So, we're going to have some things to figure out in the offseason going forward, especially I think when the portal opens up Thursday.
The portal's been opening up with some of these FCS schools. I talked about it. You had about 15 Yale players here coming down, about 40 members from Nick Arjula's family, and one of those big left tackles, 6'9", 308 pounds, has been getting looked at by some other Power 5 schools. Wasn't a visit here tonight, but he got to take in the environment. It was a great environment. But I bring that up, though, because going off from what Mike said, Garrett, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about the offseason and all, the wish list and what needs to happen. But just piggybacking off some of the things that he talked about, just moving forward with this, what would you like to see?
I mean, said it best, this is the same stuff we've been talking about all year, same stuff we've been talking about for 20 years. I mean, we got to get the pieces in here to get the job done. I know a lot of guys want to talk about coaching, and heck, a couple of guys talking about Loggins. I mean, and Scar, you probably know more about this than from the pass game aspect, but I feel as if the first half of the year, our play calling was great. And for some reason, the last couple of games, it just seems as if maybe Loggins is just – the bag is empty. He doesn't know what else to call, or maybe there's been just such the amount of I need these couple of plays to work to set up everything else. Then you run those plays early in the game and they don't work, and therefore you go, I got nothing else. Now, granted, if you're getting paid millions of dollars, you can't just sit there and go, I got nothing else. But it seems as if it's at some point, I think Loggins definitely knows how to do it. I just don't know why he hasn't done it for the last 3 weeks.
So we sit here, 5-7, no bowl game. You lose to Clemson. And because you're not going to a bowl game, that offseason just becomes that much longer, right? You're going to be thinking about a lot of things, and we're going to be talking about more what ifs. Not saying that we wouldn't have, just like we did last year, but like we've seen historically from South Carolina coaches in the last, I'd say 20, 30 years, not a lot of coaches have had a lot of success in that year 3 for whatever reason. I say all of that because before you know it, we're going to be talking about year 4 of the Shane Beamer era. Yeah. And you have some young, talented players here. You saw some of that tonight. Some of those guys continuing to come on over these last couple weeks. It doesn't do anything tonight. Doesn't help you out. Doesn't make you go to a bowl game or anything like that. But, Mike, and it's tough, was there anything that stood out to you tonight that makes you just feel a little bit better about next year? And I know it's tough to think about right now. Again, you just lost to Clemson. There's no moral victories. But when we just look at what we saw, it could be something from the defense from what we saw the last 3 weeks, especially tonight.
Yeah, it was good to see what the defense put together these past 2 weeks with getting turnovers, playing a really good overall game plan, having a good game plan against these two very good offenses. We saw what Kentucky did against the top 10 Louisville today. So it's not like we were facing some Joe Schmo terrible offense. They are a good team, and we shut them down for 10 points. And essentially we shut this team down 3 points, 6 points on offense. Realistically, that we gifted them 10 points, and they only scored by themselves about 6 points. So defensively, I thought we looked good, and we have a lot of young guys on defense, so that should be promising going into the future for next season. But I also think this is another thing that people may overlook is our team was we were 3-2. We had a really poor record, 2-5 at one point.
2-5, 2-6 actually.
2-6. Our team, most fans, I think a lot of people could have anticipated or even expected. What's happening?
I'm gonna bring you back a little bit. So
even
they can see that head of yours.
Even expect that this team could have given up and we could have just went the rest of the season maybe winning one game and having no chance for a bowl eligibility. But this team fought back, and I think that's one thing that we can attribute to Beamer and the culture he's building here is this team's always going to fight. Now the important part is going to be getting the pieces into the picture that are going to be getting us past that bowl eligibility, trying to fight for that, trying to fight now for even the SEC play or going into a better bowl game, a 10-win season, something like that is what I think we're going to try to expect from year 4 or 5 from Beamer. But we see the culture he has, and I think we see a lot of promise with these young guys.
Well, one thing I'm sure that's going to be frustrating, and we'll have time to talk about this offseason. I mentioned it throughout the course of the week. Some people asked me, was Juice Wells medically cleared? Yeah, he's been medically cleared. It was his choice. And I say that not to say, man, Juice, what are you doing? But at the end of the day, whether it be Juice, whether it be any player, when you come back from an injury, it's not just are you physically ready? You have to be mentally ready. Now, there could be other factors into a player's decision, but I bring that up because there's been plenty of cases where players have been medically cleared, but they don't play. So, but just to address that, yes, he was medically cleared. He chose not to play, but he's not the only one that has done that before in the past. And I'm not just strictly talking about South Carolina. Having said that, Juice Wells, earlier in the week, he says that he's going to be coming back to South Carolina. He's met with Loggins. He's talked about it. I bring that up because it looks like Spencer Rattler has played his last game here. You look at some of the pieces that you're going to be losing. A Spencer Rattler, most likely. A Xavier Legette, and some of the amazing things that they were able to do offensively this season. What can you say, especially about those two guys in particular, about what they did for this offense? Certainly not just them, the offense as a whole. They came up short tonight. But, I mean, man, for a team that finished 5-7, that record could have been a hell of a lot worse without those two this year.
There's a lot of games that we watched this year that we kind of sit back and go, if we didn't have Rattler, what's our record this year? We had a lot of guys who've kind of mentioned, what a waste of a year. And I don't disagree. I feel like with people like Rattler, you want to give them that Connor Shaw kind of a year, that because they're a special player and you want them to have a special year. Now, I still think that he'll be able to look back on this year and realize how much he carried the program by himself. I think that's kind of a special thing. I think a lot of guys go into colleges and want to be the guy. He was the guy here. It's not like he was surrounded by a bunch of first round picks. Him and Legette are kind of the guys. And I think that they're going to both at least have that going forward.
Mike, what kind of guy like Spencer Rattler, especially this year, being able to work with a guy like LaNorris Sellers, because you have Doty in that room still. You had a guy like Rattler in there the last 2 years, but you only had a chance to work with Sellers for a year. You have Dante Reno enrolling in January. But I think a lot of people are looking at Sellers to be the guy. What can a veteran quarterback, especially with the talents, the leadership that Rattler has, what can that do for a younger quarterback?
Yeah, I think it could do it for a lot. One, it's going to be a confidence builder. I mean, Garrett, you can probably attribute a lot of this to the young guys as well as a senior guy when you were playing. Is when you're able to instill some of the values and some of the work ethic that you, especially as a guy who is the leader of the team, a guy who continually puts in great performances in and out every single week. You can talk to the younger guys and you can tell them what kind of work ethic they're going to need, what they're going to look for, how to train properly, how to film study. That's another thing, especially specific to the QB game play, is how to study film, how to approach your game prep. Because a lot of people don't realize that is a very important part of what we do every single week when you're doing a game plan as a coach, as a player. And so when you learn how to study film, that can give you a lot of confidence when you go into the game. And so I think that's probably one thing Spencer has taught. LaNorris is, and the other guys all together as a group, is just how to approach each game like a professional and how to study film. And I think I want to say one thing to Spencer. Yeah. Listening to Loggins and what he said about Spencer in these post-game interviews, it's very impressive what he said about how it'll be mid-game and they'll talk about doing mid-game adjustments just on their drops. What we've seen from last year to this year for Spencer Rattler is just, I think, is tremendous, and I think he's shown these NFL scouts what kind of professional he can be.
I know a lot of fans throughout the course of the game. I saw it on the forum. I'm seeing it right here. Some people wanted to see LaNorris Sellers get in there. And I'm not saying that a change of pace couldn't have helped. But, Mike, you've been in situations like that. Garrett, you've been on the offensive line. Maybe you would have liked to see Lenoris get out there at some point. Maybe you would have just liked them to do something differently from a play calling standpoint. What would you just tell to those people who would have liked to see the young gun get out there tonight?
I mean, I think, I had that question a lot when I was up in the box, but I think if the run game's not working with Mario, what do you think bringing Sellers in is going to do? I mean, if you bring in a guy who is a run into pass kind of guy, you just keep loading the box up. You can throw the ball, and I think there's a lot of options there. But I feel as if, kind of like what we talked about with the Kentucky game, it looks as if they're doing a lot of plays with Sellers to set up what's going to happen next week. But I feel as if, a lot of things we did in the first quarter, they were potentially thinking, so if we can get the run game going, we'll bring in Sellers, kind of do some RPO type stuff, but always have the run as kind of a threat. If the run game is just not a threat, it just doesn't matter. There's a lot of things. If this was more of a throwaway game, then yes, I absolutely think that you got to put him out there. But I think there's so many times where we needed a gunslinger to make impossible throws to get us through that game, and that's why you got to keep Rattler in.
Any thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, I honestly agree with what a lot of Garrett said. Is a lot of it was setting up plays for Lenoris to get in there. But I think with Spencer being the guy, this game was a close game for most of the game, so you can't just take him out and put Lenoris in there in critical situations. So I understand what they did, and I don't blame them one bit for not putting Lenoris in there.
Well, bottom line is we're going to see this young man next year, and we'll see what he's capable of doing. He's going to have an opportunity in a very, very, very young quarterback room. Having said all that, again, South Carolina, they had their opportunities tonight. They just weren't able to generate the offense needed. I think the more frustrating part of it all is you spot the team. You spot Clemson 7 points early on, Joe. You spot them 7 points early on.
Yep.
And despite the fact of this defense doing a lot of good things tonight, and not just tonight, over the last 3 weeks, you gave this Clemson offense, who really wasn't anything special. They really weren't. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the Gamecocks defensively, but they didn't really do anything special tonight. But because you didn't do anything from an offensive standpoint, you weren't able to help your D out.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, it quite simply came down to the two running backs from Clemson. They had net rushing yards of 219. So that's going to get the job done. And obviously Klubnik is also a threat with his legs.
He's right behind us. He's right behind us right now as a bunch of the Clemson players come out here to celebrate, but just want to continue. That's what you're seeing behind us right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, give credit where credit's due. Shipley and Maffa are really, really, really talented players. And they, ripped up the South Carolina defense. I tweeted it in the middle of the game. It was kind of a death by 1,000 paper cuts, really. By the way that the Tigers were running the ball. They kind of, what that offense was able to do is essentially throw the car in neutral and just kind of stall out the game. But, the stat that I had was, the story of this game is essentially like the offensive letdown of South Carolina. They were 2 of 13 on third down, Mike. I wanted to point that out.
Did you hear that, guys? 2 of 13, Joe.
On third down, third down. I wanted to point that out because, I think obviously the big story being the offensive letdown.
2 of 13.
To convert like that. You need to in a rivalry game like that.
I mean, you hear a stat like that, Mike.
You're not going to win.
Trying to find something from a rhythm standpoint. 2 of 13. What does that do to an offense? I mean, I think it's easy. I think the answer is easy. We freaking saw it tonight.
We saw it tonight. Yeah, 100%. You can't get any rhythm going. You put your defense in a bind because now your defense has to be on the field for way longer. And let's be real. If you look at most of those third downs that we had, I guarantee most of them were third and longs, third and eights, and beyond. It's a lot of them. Yeah. So we weren't putting ourselves in good situations on third down, come first down and second down. We weren't prepping ourselves for the third down like we should have been doing. We kept, like I said, it comes down to the game plan that we had, and we weren't executing properly. And so, when you're dealing 3rd and 10 against a defense that's very difficult to read, and they bring a lot of pressure, it's going to make it difficult to convert third downs.
I know you guys are former players, but I can just see the looks on your face as you turn behind you and you see Clemson celebrating on your field. These are photos that will get back to South Carolina players, and these are images that are going to be in your head all offseason. What does losing to Clemson to end the year do as a player, especially knowing the importance that for 365 days, this is what people talk about?
So my sophomore year was the year where they started 5-1 and ended 6-6, and Spurrier said that we don't deserve to go to a bowl game, and that was by far the worst off season of my life. That was also the year following that was the year we went to the Outback Bowl and played Iowa. These are kind of games that I think for especially the bear in mind that Carolina beat Clemson at their house last year. So there's, of course, a lot of kids that want to take pictures in the stadium because, I mean, quite frankly, we made their year.
I'm going to flip this around because it's not going to make Gamecock fans happy here, but this is what you're having right now. You know, you have Clemson players literally dancing on your grave right now. You have Klubnik and you have some of the Clemson guys going in the cockpit taking photos. And again, I mean, this is the images that we're going to see all off season. But yeah, that's what's going on. Don't really know what else to say as we wrap things up. Joe, you have any final thoughts? Joe.
I got you. Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, my final thoughts from this one, just really, really tough one to have on your home field for South Carolina. Rivalry game, rivalry week. Very disappointing game for the South Carolina offense. Defense stood on its head, played really well, but just a couple costly turnovers sealed the deal for you early on, and Clemson just, death by 1,000 cuts, essentially. Really tough way to lose, especially in front of your home fans, but you've got all offseason to think about it, and obviously the scene going on behind you guys will certainly resonate with the boys inside of that locker room as well. So, a lot of work left to be done in the offseason, but a lot of exciting stuff happening in recruiting wise.
And there is a lot of stuff to look forward to. I still will not be surprised if in the spring game our O-line looks a lot better. I think there's a lot of motivation. There's a lot of talent in that room. I think we're going to look really good up there. I hope we can keep a lot of the guys on defense there, but I think the next year is going to be, not to make the most ridiculous comparison, but I mean, I think next year for Sellers is going to be a lot like Tebow's sophomore year at Florida, where you see a lot of the potential for greatness. So he just needs to get a lot of those, sharpened edges kind of smoothed out. I think he'll be great, and I think he's going to have a really, really exciting New Year's show. I mean, there's so much to look forward to next year. I hope we get to do a bowl game this year. I hope we are one of those fill-in slots just so that, these guys can get one more, time to strap up. I know we had a lot of fun last year in the Notre Dame Bowl. But yeah, I'm going forward. I think it's just going to be a really big offseason to really, really beat the hell out of each other and make each other better.
Mike, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be losing some key assets next year. We know what Spencer brought to this team and brought to this organization, and so losing him is going to be – it's going to be a big loss for our program. And losing Xavier Legette, number 2 receiver, I think that he didn't break the record tonight, but number 2 receiver in receiving yards for a single season, those are 2 valuable assets you're losing. But I think we have good recruiting classes coming in. We have a lot of young guys who got some good field time this year. And so we just build on that, like Garrett was saying, build on it this offseason, allow them to get continued film prep and field session prep. And so you give those guys, it's just a lot about maturity and getting more comfortable on the field. Another thing is, the nature of the game where we're at right now. You're going to have to hit the transfer portal. Yep. We know where we're at. So instead of having to develop some guys, bring some guys in who are ready to come in and be able to fill those positions in. And I think this season has shown a lot of Gamecock fans and even our coaches where we're vulnerable at and where we need to fill positions in at. And so hopefully they hit this offseason hard. Hopefully the NIL money keeps coming in so we can afford those guys. And, I think this offseason is going to be big. We're going to have to continue to just develop our players.
I think one thing to me, as we have our final thoughts as we wrap here up tonight, we've talked about it before with injuries, right? Offensive line, not just offensive line, but the offense as a whole, defensive as a whole. There were some really good things this defense showed, not just tonight, but these last 3 weeks. And while you will be losing some guys up front, you will be losing some guys in the secondary. There's a lot of young, talented guys that did some good things over these last couple weeks, especially, again, tonight when you needed them the most. So I bring that up because you're hoping that you can build off of that. Again, there's no moral victories. Bottom line is Clemson won tonight. Clemson beat you on your home field again. There's no other way to look at it. But the bottom line is you got to keep moving forward, right? This defense, they did some good things tonight. Unfortunately, the offense, it just wasn't there. And when you look at next year, and again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about it in the offseason. Tuesday night, we'll talk more about it. Schedule's going to continue to get tougher. Oklahoma's coming in. Texas is coming in. You got to play Bama next year, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, LSU. It's ridiculous, okay? So the schedule doesn't get any easier. Having said all of that, you do have some younger guys that gain some experience, not just this season, but tonight as well. Joe, let's hit some ads, and then we will wrap things up on this Saturday night.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Our first, as always, is our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Tax anxiety is an uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. Tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call on your screen right now, 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs.
And today's show is also brought to you by a good friend, Clint Hammond, over at the Movement Mortgage. If you're in the process of purchasing a home, looking for the best rate on the market, give Clint and his team a call. That's what our very own Wes Mitchell and his wife did when they were trying to purchase a home, as well as former Gamecock quarterback and captain Perry Orth and his wife, Shannon. Give Clint a call, longtime supporter of not just Gamecock Central, but as you see above, every single one of these GC Live shows. And Clint Hammond's a guy that you know very well because the line of work that you work in, you guys have a lot of similarities.
Oh, yeah. Clint's a phenomenal lender. He's very, very good at what he does. And reason why I know that so well is that I'm in real estate and I do a lot of stuff with him. You guys have any questions about the market, anything coming up, any kind of questions you got coming up, let me know. Happy to help any way I can with real estate, investing, buying a new house. What do the next couple of years look like? Yeah. Find me on Instagram, JGA70. Happy to help in any way I can.
Well, that's going to do it. We appreciate everyone that tuned in all season long for these GC Live shows through the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there certainly was plenty of that. Unfortunately for South Carolina tonight, there was some good on defense, but there was some ugly on the offensive side. And because of that, the Gamecocks just not able to get the victory tonight. Give Clemson credit, especially that front seven, causing havoc all night long. As the Gamecocks in the season 5-7 and does not appear the Gamecocks will be going bowling. And I say that because I know there's a small chance they can still make it 5-7. If that happens, we'll talk about that. But as far as tonight goes, they're not going bowling. And that's just the bottom line. Appreciate, again, everyone that tuned in this season. We appreciate former Gamecock quarterback Michael Skarnecki, as well as former Gamecock offensive lineman Garrett Anderson, for joining the shows with us all season long, as well as intern Joe and all of you who've listened to these shows all season long. GC Live will continue to roll on Tuesday night. We'll keep the show going. Joe, I'm sure, will have the walkthrough tomorrow, so if you want to listen to that. And if you missed any of our show today, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page where you can watch it in its entirety. Or if you're a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. Again, thank you from the beginning of the season all the way up in Charlotte to here at Williams-Brice Stadium these last 4 weeks. We appreciate every single one of you that tuned in. Be safe tonight, and we will see you Tuesday night on GC Live Talking Tuesdays as we recap the season that was and look ahead to what the Gamecocks could be doing this offseason.